God bless everyone. Today, I am honored to share with you the testimony of our brother. A man who devoted his entire life to the discipline and teachings of martial arts as a sensei. For many years, he was guided by his dedication to his craft, living by the principles of martial arts. However, after a profound experience, he repented and chose to dedicate himself to the path of Jesus Christ. In his testimony, he recounts a remarkable encounter. One that is both surprising and deeply meaningful. He claims to have seen Bruce Lee, a man he had admired for years, during a spiritual revelation that played a significant role in his conversion. This powerful experience helped him realize the importance of faith, redemption, and the grace of God in his life. I will now read his letter to you, in his own words, as he shares the incredible journey of his transformation. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. I am Alex. I have lived as a Shinto Buddhist for 71 years. But after this life-changing experience, I completely repented and dedicated myself to the path of Jesus Christ. Let me share a bit about my life and the journey that brought me here. I was born in Okinawa in 1953, where my childhood was shaped by the unique culture of the island. My father ran a traditional karate dojo, and from a very young age, martial arts was instilled in me as not just a discipline but as a way of life. My father regarded martial arts above everything else. And it was in this environment that I learned the importance of strength, discipline, and mastery. His ambition was to bring the art of Okinawan karate to the world. And for that purpose, he encouraged me to travel to America to promote our culture. I moved to America with the hopes of spreading the teachings of Okinawan karate. But what I didn't expect was the profound transformation that would eventually take place in my life. For many years, I lived and taught with the same intensity and focus that my father had instilled in me. My path was one of self-discipline, pride in my heritage, and an unwavering commitment to my craft. However, it wasn't until a life-altering experience that I came to understand the deeper purpose of my existence. In 1976, when I was 23 years old, I made the life-changing journey to America. Being in a foreign country was an incredibly difficult adjustment for me. I missed the deep respect and traditions that I had grown up with in Okinawa. And I found it challenging to adapt to the fast-paced, sometimes impersonal nature of American culture. Everything felt unfamiliar: the way people interacted, the way life seemed to move at a different rhythm than what I was used to. It was hard for me to find my footing. But rather than retreating into my discomfort or allowing myself to feel lost, I chose to put aside my personal ambitions for success and instead focused on something greater. I began spreading my own teachings, the teachings I had inherited over the years, with the hope that others could benefit from the wisdom I had gathered. For the next 50 years, I committed myself fully to the path of teaching, dedicating my life to helping others understand the importance of meditation, self-discipline, and soul purification. I came to believe that these practices rooted in the traditions of Okinawan martial arts were the key to achieving true inner peace. They had been essential in shaping my own life, and I felt it was my calling to pass on this wisdom to others. I poured my heart into this work, believing deeply that these teachings had the power to heal, to bring balance to the mind and spirit, and to guide others on their own paths to peace and self-mastery. One afternoon, I arrived at the dojo, just as I had countless times before. My students were already waiting. As always, their faces eager with anticipation, ready to absorb the lesson ahead. That day, I had planned to explain a fundamental concept that the harmony of body and breath is what brings true strength in combat. As I began to speak, one of my students raised his hand and asked, "Sensei, what is the secret to performing Seiken Suki correctly?" At first, the question seemed simple. Seiken Suki was just a punch. After all. But this punch was more than just a physical movement, it was a technique that taught how to focus and channel power to the right point. A precise release of energy that could make all the difference in a fight. It was a movement that embodied the balance between strength and control, breath and force. Though I had demonstrated it hundreds of times before, I knew that each time I performed it, it had to be with the same care, the same precision, the same focus. I took my stance, inhaled deeply, and, as I had done countless times, I thrust my fist forward with all the power and concentration I could muster. Each movement was deliberate, each breath a part of the flow. But as I completed the punch and exhaled, something unexpected happened. A sharp pain suddenly shot through my chest. More intense than any I had ever experienced. It was as if my breath had been stolen from me, and every ounce of energy I had used was instantly drained. My body felt as though it were betraying me. My knees began to tremble. And before I could react, I collapsed to the floor. The dojo, the students, and everything around me seemed to fade into the background as I struggled to catch my breath. The pain was overwhelming. And I knew in that moment that something had changed, something that would lead me down a path I could never have anticipated. I took my stance, focused deeply, and with one sharp breath, I thrust my fist forward, pouring all the energy I had into the punch. Every muscle in my body, every ounce of strength, was channeled into that singular motion. But as I completed the punch and exhaled, something went horribly wrong. A sudden, sharp pain exploded in my chest. Unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just pain, it was an intense, suffocating force that seemed to cut off my breath completely. It felt as though the very life force in my body was drained in an instant, leaving me weak and gasping for air. My knees buckled beneath me. And despite trying to step back, my body betrayed me. I couldn't move. Couldn't gather the strength to rise. The world around me seemed to tilt, my vision blurring. And in that moment, I realized I was losing control. My body no longer responded as it should. I collapsed to the ground, unable to regain my footing, unable to speak. The dojo around me, the students watching in silence, all faded as the pain consumed me. I felt helpless, disoriented, and powerless. As though everything I had known, everything I had built my life upon, was slipping away. I could hear the voices of my students, their frantic attempts to lift me up. But the sounds quickly grew distant, fading into the background as if I were sinking deeper into a void. My world, once vibrant with life, began to blur. My vision dimmed. And with it, I felt an overwhelming emptiness settling deep within me. A hollow sensation that gripped my chest. I felt as though I was being pulled away from everything I had known, dragged into a place so dark, so profound, that I could no longer tell where I was or what was happening. It felt like a complete severing from the world. As though my connection to life had vanished entirely, leaving me to drift into the abyss. When I finally opened my eyes again, I was met with a suffocating darkness. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a heaviness. A weight that pressed in on me from all sides. Like the very air was thick and heavy, wrapping itself around me. This darkness wasn't empty, it was a presence. A force that seemed to invade my very soul. It was as if this void had a mind of its own, pulling me deeper and deeper into its grasp. There was no sound, not even the faintest whisper, to reassure me that I was still connected to the world. The silence was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a living thing. A consuming presence that swallowed every part of me. It was not simply the absence of noise, it was the absence of everything: light, life, warmth, meaning. I was alone. Not just physically, but in every sense of the word. This space wasn't just empty, it was filled with an endless isolation. A void that stretched on forever. And it seemed like there was no way out. No escape from the consuming darkness. As I struggled to adjust to the overwhelming darkness, a faint humming sound began to emerge from somewhere deep within the void. At first, it felt distant, like a faint echo reverberating from far off, barely perceptible amidst the stillness. But as I tried to move, the sound began to grow, drawing closer with each passing moment. It was not a comforting sound, but rather one that seemed to carry an unsettling weight, like a signal that something was near, something waiting in the shadows. The more I moved, the heavier my steps became. It felt as if the very air around me was thickening, pulling at me with each step I took. My legs felt sluggish, as though I were wading through dense, swampy ground. Every movement seemed more laborious, each inch forward harder to gain than the last. I was being dragged by an unseen force, one that pressed against me from every direction, as though the darkness itself was intent on keeping me where I was. The weight of the air around me was suffocating, making it feel as if I was fighting against an invisible tide. The more I tried to move, the slower I became, as if the darkness was not just a void, but a physical presence that sought to weigh me down and hold me in place. The humming gradually shifted, twisting into a new sound, a rasping, grating noise that echoed through the suffocating darkness. It was something akin to the grinding of teeth. A sound so unnatural and disturbing that it made my entire body tense in fear. The noise wasn't just disturbing in its nature, it carried with it a deep, unbearable tension. As if each scratch of sound held the weight of something far greater, something far more suffocating. It felt as though the noise itself was steeped in the emotions I had long ignored: regret, fear, and the crushing burden of abandonment. Each rasp seemed to pierce through me, resonating with a heaviness that I couldn't escape. In that moment, I realized that this place was not just a physical realm of torment. It wasn't simply a space of suffering or pain. No, it was far more profound than that. It was a mirror. A direct reflection of the turmoil inside me, of the darkness I had never confronted. This place was a manifestation of all the fears, regrets, and unresolved emotions I had buried deep within myself throughout my life. It wasn't just the external horrors I was facing, it was the inner chaos that I had never allowed myself to acknowledge, let alone address. The rasping noise, the darkness, the suffocating weight, they were the echoes of my own soul. A reflection of every fear and regret I had accumulated over the years, now made manifest in a place where there was nowhere to hide from them. Slowly, beams of light began to flicker around me. But rather than bringing any sense of comfort, they only intensified the horror of my surroundings. These lights weren't soft or peaceful, they were sharp and unsettling, casting an eerie glow that highlighted the vast, unimaginable emptiness around me. It was as if the light was exposing the very soul of this place, revealing the deep, unrelenting sense of damnation that filled the space. Through the flickering light, I could make out the shape of a lake, an enormous lake of fire. Its depth stretched far beyond what I could see, infinite and unfathomable. as though it went on forever, consuming everything in its path. This fire wasn't just an external blaze, it was something far deeper, far more terrifying. It was an inner rage. A burning anger that seemed to emanate from within the very core of this place. It wasn't just the physical flames that tormented me, it was the fire within. A manifestation of everything I had avoided, ignored, or denied throughout my life. Every ounce of unresolved anger. Every moment of rage and bitterness that I had pushed away for years, now flared to life before me. The fire mirrored the darkness inside me, reflecting the inner turmoil I had never faced. The emotions I had never allowed myself to confront. As the shadows around me deepened, I felt them closing in on me, tightening like a vice. The darkness was no longer just a backdrop, it was an oppressive force, suffocating me with its weight. I tried to move, tried to step forward or retreat, but my limbs felt heavy, as if they were bound by the very darkness that surrounded me. Each movement I attempted was slow and labored, as though I were struggling against an invisible force that held me in place. The weight of the darkness pressed down on me, making it feel as though I were being crushed, trapped beneath an immense pressure I couldn't escape. With each passing second, a growing sense of dread began to settle in my chest. I realized, in that moment, that there was no way out of this place. There was no escape from the suffocating shadows, no route to freedom. This wasn't just a physical space of torment, it was something deeper, something more insidious. It was a spiritual prison, and I was its captive. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't just imprisoned by the physical confines of this place, but by the very darkness inside me. This was a place of soul-crushing isolation, where I was not only trapped in the absence of light but also in the grip of my own regrets, fears, and failures. I was bound by the consequences of my choices. And there was no release, no mercy, only the crushing weight of being held in this eternal prison. Then, I felt it, a force, unseen and unrelenting, pulling me toward the mouth of a massive cave. It was as if the very air around me was alive, tugging at my body, dragging me forward against my will. The cave itself seemed like a dark vortex, a swirling, inescapable force that beckoned me deeper into its oppressive depths. The closer I got, the more suffocating the atmosphere became, as though the very darkness inside the cave was pressing against me, wrapping around me like a cloak. There was no resistance, no way to fight against this pull. My body moved forward as if I had no control, as if my will had been stripped away, leaving me with nothing but the overwhelming force of this unseen power guiding me. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to escape. But there was no fighting it. I could feel the weight of this place, heavy and suffocating. And I knew, deep within me, that there was no other path but forward. There was no way to turn back, no option to resist. The only choice I had now was to enter, to walk deeper into the abyss that awaited me inside the cave. With each step, the oppressive air grew thicker, and I felt the walls of the cave close in on me. The sound of my own footsteps seemed to disappear into the vast emptiness. And I realized that I was entering a place far darker than anything I had ever imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew that whatever lay within the cave was unavoidable. It was a place of reckoning, and I was being drawn into it with a force greater than myself. Inside, the cave was silent, so eerily silent that it felt even more oppressive than the darkness outside. The stillness hung in the air like a weight, pressing down on me, as if the very silence itself was a living entity, suffocating me with its heaviness. Every step I took seemed to echo in the emptiness, Yet it was a sound that seemed to disappear as soon as it was made. Swallowed by the vast void around me. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, the remnants of a forgotten past began to emerge from the shadows. Broken swords lay scattered across the ground. Their once sharp edges now dulled and rusted with time. Tattered armor, once worn with pride and purpose, now hung lifelessly on the walls. Decaying and covered in dust. Worn-out symbols of martial arts, once symbols of strength and honor, were barely recognizable. Faded and torn by the ravages of time. Everything in this cave seemed to belong to a distant era. A time long past. When these relics had held meaning, power, and purpose. But now, in this forsaken place, they had lost their significance. The swords, the armor, the symbols, they were now nothing more than forgotten remnants of a history that had slipped away into obscurity. The once proud legacy they represented had been reduced to mere artifacts. Their value diminished by the passage of time and the absence of any true purpose. The cave, filled with these abandoned remnants, felt like a tomb for what was once alive. Now a hollow echo of things that had once mattered but no longer did. The weight of that loss hung in the air. A reminder of the futility of holding on to the past without understanding its true meaning. As I wandered deeper into the dark, suffocating cave, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just another shadow. Another trick of the dim light. But as I stepped closer, I realized I was wrong. There, standing in the center of the cave, was a familiar figure. It was Bruce Lee. I was stunned. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. How could this be? I had spent years admiring him, studying his philosophy and martial arts. Yet never in my wildest dreams did I expect to encounter him in this place. In this moment, he looked at me. And as his gaze met mine, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with an undeniable presence. It was as if the very space around him bent with the weight of his energy. And the room itself seemed to hold its breath. There was no denying the power in his presence despite the strange, unsettling surroundings. He stood there, unshaken. And yet his eyes held a depth I had never seen in him before. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, rough, like it had been weathered by time and regret. "Haruki," he said, his words coming out slowly, as if each one carried a weight of its own. "I stayed away from the path of Jesus all my life. I turned my back on God and His grace. I chose to rise with my own strength, to rely on my abilities, thinking I could forge my own way. But now, I see that all of that only led to emptiness." His voice, though familiar, carried a sorrowful tone that cut deep. The words he spoke were not just a confession, they were a powerful revelation. A moment of clarity that resonated in my very soul. The man who had spent his life building his body, his philosophy, his empire, now stood before me, acknowledging the emptiness that had plagued him all along. It was as though, in that moment, he too had come to understand that true strength didn't lie in the physical, but in the grace and humility of surrendering to something greater than oneself. "Haruki," he said, his voice thick with a deep sorrow that seemed to echo through the very air. His words carried the weight of a lifetime of unspoken truths, each one heavy with regret and understanding. "I stayed away from the path of Jesus all my life. I turned my back on God and His grace. I believed in my own strength, in my own ability. I thought I could rise on my own, carve my own way to freedom, that I could achieve everything through sheer will and skill. But now, I see the truth. All of that. All the strength. All the success, it led only to emptiness. It was all for nothing. In the end, nothing I achieved mattered without him. I was blind to it. But now I understand. I was wrong. I rejected the one path that could have saved me. The only path that truly leads to peace. His words struck me like a hammer. Each one breaking through the barriers I had built in my mind. Here was a man whose strength and determination had shaped the world. Yet in this moment, he was confessing that it had all been in vain. The fame, the power, the mastery, it had all crumbled in the face of a deeper truth. In that moment, I saw that no matter how strong or skilled we become, we are nothing without God's grace. What we build with our own hands, no matter how mighty, is ultimately meaningless if it isn't rooted in the foundation of truth, love, and salvation. Hearing those words from Bruce Lee, a man I had admired deeply for so long, someone who had carved his own path to greatness, I was overwhelmed by the weight of everything he said. His words were not just a confession, they were a profound revelation. One that shattered everything I had believed about strength, achievement, and purpose. For years, I had looked up to him as the epitome of mastery and self-discipline. A symbol of power and will. He was a man who had transcended the limitations of ordinary human potential. Or so I thought. I had imagined that through his incredible achievements, he had unlocked the secret to life's true meaning. But now, in this moment, I saw him for what he truly was, a man who, despite all his greatness, had faced the same emptiness that I had confronted. And it was a humbling realization. Bruce Lee, with all his strength, fame, and knowledge, had come to understand something I had refused to acknowledge for most of my life. He had realized that despite all the accolades and victories, none of it mattered in the end without God. It wasn't just his words, it was the deep sorrow in his voice, the weight of regret in his eyes. That struck me to my core. He had spent his life searching for freedom and fulfillment in the pursuit of power. But in the end, he found only emptiness, just as I had. I knew then that my own path had led me to the same void. Like Bruce, I had spent so much of my life chasing after things that seemed important: mastery of martial arts, control over my mind and body, the admiration of others, but all of it had been for nothing. It wasn't that those things weren't valuable in their own right, it was that I had relied on them to give me meaning, rather than seeking the truth that could only be found in God's grace. My own journey mirrored his, though I hadn't fully realized it until now. I had been searching for fulfillment in the wrong places. And I saw with clarity that, like Bruce Lee, I had been pursuing something that could never truly satisfy my soul. The realization was both painful and liberating. It was painful because it meant confronting the truth that all the effort, all the striving, all the time spent mastering my craft, had not brought me what I truly needed. But it was liberating because in that moment, I understood that the path forward was not through more strength, more control, or more achievement. The only way to escape the darkness, the only way to find peace, was to embrace the grace of God. This was not a path that I had ever considered before. For so long, I had been blinded by the belief that my strength was enough, that my discipline could carry me through. But now, standing there, I realized that there was no way out of the emptiness I had been feeling. No way to fill the void within me, except through surrendering to God. It wasn't about striving for perfection anymore, it was about accepting that I was not enough on my own. I felt a deep sorrow for the years I had spent ignoring the truth, for the time I had wasted trying to fill the emptiness inside me with things that could never satisfy. It was a sorrow that came from realizing how much of my life had been devoted to chasing after fleeting things: achievement, strength, recognition, all while neglecting the one thing that could truly fill the void. But this sorrow was not without hope. It was tempered by a newfound understanding, a clarity that cut through the years of confusion and self-deception. I now saw that the path I had been searching for was finally clear to me. It wasn't about my own strength or mastery anymore. The true path was one of grace, faith, and the unconditional love of God. I now understood that it was only through Him that I could ever find lasting peace, freedom from my inner turmoil, and the fulfillment I had been desperately seeking. As Bruce Lee's words continued to resonate deeply within me, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had admired him for so long, not just as a martial artist, but as a symbol of strength and resilience. But now, in his confession and the realization he shared with me, I saw that his life had also been a search for truth, a journey toward understanding what truly matters. Despite the emptiness he had felt in his own life, he had been given the insight to see that only through God could true fulfillment be found. And in this moment, I too began to see the same truth. I no longer needed to seek meaning in places that offered only temporary satisfaction. I had spent so much of my life relying on my own strength to carry me through. But I now knew that I couldn't do it alone. The strength I had always sought fulfillment and strength within myself, believing that my own will, discipline, and abilities were enough to guide me. I thought I could find peace, purpose, and success through my own effort. But no matter how hard I tried or what I achieved, it was never enough. The peace I longed for always seemed out of reach, like a mirage. The power I sought was fleeting, and my sense of accomplishment felt hollow. In the moment of surrender, I realized the truth: the strength, peace, and fulfillment I sought within myself could never compare to the grace and power that God offered. What I tried to achieve through my own efforts paled in comparison to what He freely gave. His grace was a gift, unearned and abundant, filling me in ways I had been unable to on my own. Through His grace, I found the peace and strength I had been searching for, not through my own ability, but through the power of His love. The path ahead was no longer unclear. In that moment of profound realization, I understood that the only true path forward, the only way to escape the darkness I had long been trapped in, was the one that led me to God. No longer would I search for meaning in external achievements. No longer would I place my trust in self-reliance or personal strength. Those paths had only led to emptiness, to frustration, to an unending cycle of striving without satisfaction. Instead, I would surrender to the grace of God, fully trusting in His plan for me, even if that plan was unknown and daunting. I knew that by following the path God had set before me, I would find what I had been seeking all along: true peace, true fulfillment, and the purpose that had eluded me for so many years. This journey was no longer about control or mastery, it was about surrender and trust. As I stepped forward into the unknown, I did so with the conviction that God's love would guide me every step of the way. This path would not be easy. It would require me to let go of old habits, old beliefs, and the pride that had kept me from truly embracing His love. But I knew that it was the only way to find the light that would heal my wounds and transform my life in ways I had never imagined. Through God's grace, I would finally find the peace I had longed for, the fulfillment I had sought in all the wrong places. I would be made whole, not by my own strength or efforts, but by the love of a God who had always been there, patiently waiting for me to turn toward Him. And in that love, I would discover a peace that surpassed all understanding, a peace that could only come from Him. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.